So today we're diving into a source that captures a really intense moment in recent history, a time of pretty unprecedented global crisis, where it seemed like the world's leaders were all standing in open opposition to the President of the United States. Let's dig into what the source tells us about this pretty critical moment.
To really get a sense of the stakes here, the source kicks things off with this just chilling statement. Now get this, this wasn't from some protester or a critic on the news. According to the source, this was a warning from one world leader to another at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Wow. I mean, that one sentence just sets the stage for a massive global crisis.
You know that annual meeting in the Swiss Alps? Usually it's all about economics and policy. Well, according to this source, it was no longer business as usual. It had basically turned into this frantic emergency summit with one single urgent goal, figuring out how on earth to deal with the American president.
And the language they were using became, well, shockingly direct. The source documents a whole string of these just incredible criticisms. We're not talking about simple policy disagreements anymore. Leaders were openly questioning the stability, the very character of U.S. leadership, using phrases like evil madman and calling the president the biggest threat to peace.
The source really zeroes in on a speech by Canada's minister as this particularly sobering moment. This quote right here, it just cuts right to the heart of all the anxiety. The argument is, when one super dominant power forces everyone else into these one-on-one deals, it's not really a partnership anymore. It's just a performance. You're pretending to be sovereign while actually being forced to submit.
Okay, so what exactly was happening that caused this massive international backlash? Well, the source material points to a whole series of specific actions that were setting off alarm bells all over the world.
First up, you've got economic chaos. The source talks about these unilateral tariffs that slapped hundreds of billions in new taxes on goods, and it highlights this staggering one-day drop of nearly 900 points in the Dow Jones. According to the source, that was a huge red flag, a clear sign of growing global instability.
And then there's the foreign policy stuff, which, wow. The source details a series of moves that it claims completely shook America's allies. We're talking about allegations that the U.S. president seized the leader of Venezuela, threatened war with Iran, tried to trade a Nobel Prize for Greenland, and even announced a new board of peace to replace the UN.
And the alarm wasn't just about what was happening on the world stage. The source also points to actions at home, like what it calls a violent and lawless occupation by armed federal officers in Minneapolis. And then there was the unilateral pardon of all January 6th insurrectionists on the very first day of the president's new term.
So this brings us to what is maybe the most fascinating part of this whole situation. While the world is sounding every alarm bell it can sound, the source documents a completely different reality being broadcast from the White House. You end up with these two totally separate narratives.
I mean, just look at this comparison. It is stark. On one side, the source says you have world leaders who see the U.S. as a rogue state, maybe even run by a tyrant. And on the other side, the president's own words. I saved millions, we have a perfect system, we've never been stronger. The disconnect is just absolute.
And maybe nothing illustrates this self-perception more powerfully than this direct quote that the source provides. When he was asked if God would be proud of what he'd done, his response was, well, pretty clear.
To really drive this point home, the source talks about a list of accomplishments that was apparently being passed around by White House staff. So while the rest of the world is worried about a potential global war, this list included things like taking away a political rival's son's security detail and ending the use of paper straws.
So, okay, beyond all the personalities and the politics, what was really on the line here? The source makes a much bigger argument, that this was about the very foundation of the global order, a system that had been in place for almost 100 years. Let's get into that.
The source puts forward this really powerful idea it calls the World War Avoidance Machine. This reframes that whole post-World War II system, the UN, NATO, all those alliances, not as some project for liberal democracy, but as a purely pragmatic machine, with the US right at the center, designed for one singular purpose, to stop World War III from ever happening. And for about 80 years, the source argues, this machine, for all its flaws, and there were many, it actually worked. It achieved its main goal. So the crisis that this source is documenting is what happens when that machine starts to fall apart. Not because of an outside attack, but because it's being dismantled by its own chief architect.
And this leads to this fundamental role reversal, a really crucial point. This source is asking us to think about the consequences. What happens when the country that was supposed to guarantee the system becomes its biggest threat?
This is the ultimate flip. The nation that built the World War avoidance machine to contain aggressive autocratic countries is now, according to the source, being described by its own allies using those exact same words, a rogue state, or sounding like an Axis power. That is a massive shift.
And the source provides this text message, apparently from the president to the prime minister of Norway, as a piece of direct evidence. It's an explicit rejection of that idea of collective security that the whole post-war order was built on, in favor of a purely transactional, America-first view of the world.
So the source's conclusion is, well, it's pretty grim. That World War avoidance machine, the system that basically defined global politics for our parents' and grandparents' entire lives, isn't just failing. It's being actively taken apart by the very country that built it in the first place.
And all of this leaves us with a final, pretty unsettling question that the source's analysis poses. For 80 years, the world relied on this one central pillar to keep things stable. The source documents a moment when that pillar started to act more like a wrecking ball. And it leaves you to wonder, what happens next?